Dr. Benjamin F. Chavis Jr., and this is how to get your money right. We're very pleased to welcome Soo Kim.
Dr. Chavis, the honor is mine. Thank you.
You have an outstanding career, and I want to just go into it first. Where were you originally born?
Born in Korea, but grown up in Queens.
Were your family members also business people? How'd you get involved in business?
No. My dad was actually a doctor. He came here in '77 before we got here to finish his med school. And actually, I think one of the reasons why it was important for me to figure this out is because he was probably such a bad business person that we had our set of challenges, even though one might say that, oh, you're son of a doctor, or kid's a doctor, or something like that, you'd be all right. But we've had our challenges, and so it was important for me to figure that out.
There's a debate about public education in America. Are the schools really preparing young people to have success? Tell us about your early childhood education.
Yeah, look, I mean, I was fortunate. I went to public schools, back in the 80s and 90s, and I think back then there was no doubt that they did the job in New York, and there was a opportunity to get what was essentially a world-class education if you just continue to do all right in the public school system. There was a track for that. Public school catering to those families that don't necessarily have the option to send their kids to even another track, but they still work, where they still exist, I was a fortunate beneficiary of that.
So tell us, how did you ascend up the business ladder?
Look, I will tell you that growing up in Queens, you learn a couple of things. First of all, Queens is the most diverse county in the country. So I think there's like 150 languages spoken, and there, it's diversity isn't a something to it's not a term. It's just it's a reality, and so I think it's great training for. My journey in life, because Queens was not very Asian. Now it is actually quite Asian. And so you just learn to get by and you deal with it. And so it was good training, because then after my high school, I went to Princeton for my undergrad, and that was a completely different world, like pretty much the diametric opposite. And that was also good training for me to figure it out, right? And so after that, I came right back to New York. I just wanted to come back home and start working. There I found myself, I guess it's 25 years ago now, working on Wall Street, not quite carrying the briefcase, but wearing the suit. And that too was a journey of, some being comfortable with a little bit of discomfort. But
what did you do on Wall Street initially?
Well, I've been in the business of doing actually an esoteric term. It's called distressed debt investing, or stressed and distressed investing. So looking at mostly troubled companies, so credit and equities in troubled companies, and seeing whether or not there's an opportunity to fix them, turn them around, and then you make money if the thing works out.
The first African-American billionaire was Reginald F. Lewis.
Oh, sure.
And that's exactly what he did.
Hero of mine, yeah, exactly.
Yes,
I know the story, yeah.
I know the Lewis family very well, and he learned Wall Street, and he started mergers and acquisitions, getting distressed companies and making them profitable and then selling them for a profit.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that is something that I didn't actually know that I was getting into. That is not necessarily a field at the time that was that exciting to people. Remember, troubled companies are troubled situations. People aren't happy. And in order to engage yourself into a situation where people are already unhappy, you have to be comfortable with some discomfort. And luckily, all my training, all my life, was a reasonable amount of that. And so it was just like water off a duck's back. People are upset. That's okay. We're going to fix it eventually. And if it worked out, and that didn't always work out, then everyone's happy at the end, and it's a great when you're born with no advantages, when you come into a situation with no advantages, you just have to work harder. You have to be more intentional about every action that you take. I think that leaves room for someone like ourselves who doesn't take anything for granted and is willing to put in the work now and then show up, and then before they knew it, we had all the advantages.
Fast forward, you own some of the major radio stations in New York City, WBLS, Hot 97, two remarkable radio stations serving our nation's largest city.
Look, it's a responsibility, and we've been trying to turn that business around. I think the radio business is challenged, so it's we're still in the process of doing so, but it's been very important for us to do so in a way that is authentic and is also in keeping with the heritage of what BLS and then Hot 97 were and are still today. And it's important for us to move it forward economically, make it a better business, but also retain that history, because I think that's part of why it will be even a better business in the future. So when I got there, it was being run out of Indianapolis, which is great. But I think that there's nothing. I have no beef with Indianapolis, but I just thought that it's probably be better to hire a local management team, a management team that reflects the community.
So your principle earlier about the business reflecting its customer base. So in Hot 97 and WBLS, your management team now reflects the community that it serves.
Absolutely, the whole company does. It's reflective from the board, officers, all of the team, to the audience. Absolutely.
And you have major business interests also in Chicago. How did you have this kind of success in one of the nation's largest cities?
It's kind of interesting because the city of Chicago has been trying to get a casino since gaming has been legalized in Illinois for, I think, about 20 years or so. Almost, it's a multi-decade, and lots of people tried to pull it off, but Mayor Lightfoot actually did. It was one of the, I don't think she's going to get enough credit for that, but she came in and she said, hey, we got to fix this. And so even though the state had passed a law enabling City of Chicago Casino a few years back, it was still messed up. The taxes were wrong, and wasn't attracting any other bidders. So a couple of years ago, she went right at the beginning. She went down to Springfield, got the law changed so that it would attract a set of bidders. We saw that. We saw the news of that and said, hey, we have, so I'm the chairman of Bally's. We said, let's go after City of Chicago. That sounds like an exciting opportunity. Look, it's the third largest metropolis in the country. So it's a wonderful opportunity to try to create a regional destination. So we went out and bid against some of the grandees of the city. But how we did it is we just worked harder. I mean, look, when you're born with no advantages, when you come into a situation with no advantages, you just have to work harder. You have to be more intentional about every action that you take because you don't have any advantages. So there we worked really hard to get community support. And so we were the only bidder of the 5 that ultimately bid that had local aldermanic support. We worked hard with organized labor. Chicago is a proud organized labor city. And we were the only bidder that had the unions on our side, going into the bid, And I just think people, sometimes when you have all the advantages, you take things for granted. Like, oh, we'll get that later. And we don't have to do that now. And so I think that leaves room for someone like ourselves who doesn't take anything for granted and is willing to put in the work now and then show up, and then before they knew it, we had all the advantages.
So hard work pays off.
It does. It doesn't always. I mean, look. I'm not just saying. I'm not so naive to think that hard work alone is gonna make it work. But if you're willing to do it, if you're willing to put in the work, you're willing to be intentional about building your alliances and and not taking things for granted, it really does help. I believe that in the end, for a company to be as profitable as it can be, one of the questions I ask is, well, who is our audience? Who are our customers? And is our company, aligned to them? That's just good business.
A lot of people give lip service to DEI.
Yeah.
But as an Asian American business person in New York, now in Chicago, and other parts of the country, how has being an Asian American either hindered you or helped you?
First, let me talk about how I view diversity and why I think diversity is good business.
Okay.
So I think that's the first. Because remember, as ultimately an entrepreneur business person, my lens is fiduciary. We need to, preserve capital and make it grow. That's really that's the Delaware standard. And so I want to talk about how that fits into that world. But I also want to talk about the experiences of Asian Americans in New York or in America, and that's a different problem. So in terms of diversity, it's interesting. I really try not to use the acronyms I'm more of a representation person. I believe that in the end, for a company to be as profitable as it can be, and again, remember, part of what I do is I step into a situation and I'm sort of willing to think about things, take a step back and say, everything's messed up right now. What do we need to do to fix it? What do we need to do to set this company up in a different path than it's on? Because the path that it's on is going nowhere. And so, one of the questions I ask is, well, who is our audience? Who are our customers? And is our company, aligned to them, right? Because
Representation.
Absolutely. So if you know who your audience or your customers are, then you should have a workforce that looks like your audience, that looks like your customer base, right? And then you should have management that looks like your workforce, and then you should have upper management and directorships and officers that look like your management, that looks like your workers, that look like your customers. That's just good business. To me, there's no better business than that. There's nothing more greedy than to make sure that you are aligned with your customer base. So I think that's the way I define it. I don't define it in some term that you can look up in the book. I think it's pretty straightforward. That's just gravity. Representation is gravity. So for Asian Americans specifically, it's kind of interesting. We have a different experience here. The Black and Asian communities are actually, we're united by one thing, is that we share the fact that we have immutable characteristics. We're just gonna look different.
Right.
And you can't.
Immutable characteristics.
Yeah, exactly. We just look different, and that's okay. Different doesn't mean bad or worse or good or bad, or there's no weight to that. It's just immutably different, and that's, I think ultimately that's a great thing for America, because America is really this melting pot, this multicultural, multi-ethnic country that is a strong weave of the differences, which makes a much ultimately a better product. Our journey as Asian Americans are interesting because we also have our history of discrimination. Obviously, Asian Americans were the only ones ever rounded up during a war, right? It's not like, when the Americans when they're fighting the Japanese and the Germans, they didn't round up the Germans and put them in the concentration camp, right? I don't think Asian Americans were even allowed to immigrate to the country until 64, 63. So, we thank the civil rights movement for the beginning, for allowing us. So my dad came in 77, right? But again, it's the wave of the immigration that was allowed because the rules started to change in the 60s, And so I'm a direct beneficiary of really the greater arc of the civil rights movement. So I think that our experiences are a little different in America, but similar, analogous. I do believe that there is structural racism, right? So, but that's okay. That doesn't mean, it just means that we just have to do better. It's not like the be all end all. It's better than it was, and Doesn't mean that we're good enough, and we just got to keep working at it. If the Black community suffers from like a pushing down, and so it doesn't actually matter if you're, a Black doctor, with all these PhDs. When you get pulled over by a cop, you were scared,
Exactly.
and so that's a unifying experience. But it's so interesting that it's so unfair, yet America is a team sport. And what I've noticed is that shared experience then brings that community together, and now you can act with political force. So that's pretty exciting, and to see how much change your community has actually brought by being together. Now, Asian Americans, we don't quite have those numbers, but our journey is different. We're not pushed down. I think we're pushed up, but pushed up and about. Like Asian Americans in America are taught that our competition is other Asian Americans, right? Because I'm like, hey, there's only a handful of spots, for us, people that look like us in those situations. So I gotta beat you. I don't have to beat everyone else. I have to beat you. I feel like the Asian American community doesn't come together, doesn't stick together. And I think part of it is the structure that we had to get through to get wherever it was to make it, quote unquote, make it. That's something that I've just observed in my career, and it's something that I try to work against and make sure that we of immutable characteristics and shared histories, try to stick together to help each other in America, because America is, again, a team sport. I keep saying it, but it's important. And we have to resist the fact that we've been pitted against each other to that point. It's not, Asians against any other groups. It's actually Asian Americans against Asian Americans. And so it's something that, I spend a lot of time thinking about and, wondering how do we, get through it. As much as we all know American history, the ideals on which it was founded were even greater than the people that founded it. In some ways, right? And also the actions, in the interim, right?
Still moving toward a more perfect union.
100%, and still really moving towards the ideals in which it was founded. So I think that's what's so hopeful about it, is that we're not there yet.
You mentioned how America has evolved as a multiracial, multicultural, multilingual society. Do you see the pendulum moving in the right direction in terms of diversity being embraced by all Americans?
The history of America is so interesting because, we, growing up in school, you celebrate like the Pilgrims, right? Like, oh, the Pilgrims landed in Cape Cod and made America. Well, that's actually not entirely true. Obviously the Pilgrims are pretty, and the Puritans, they were pretty closed-minded, and they did not, I don't think they would be really into the whole diversity thing right now, But I love this country. I don't criticize it. I have been fortunate to been born elsewhere, come here, appreciate it for what it is. I've also traveled a lot, so. I've been a lot of places, but whenever I landed back at JFK, I'm like, thank God I'm home, And so I think that America can always be better, but I think it is better than it was, and it will continue to be better.
As a distinguished, successful Asian American business person, how do you see the future of America?
I think the future's bright. I think that, there's still, having spent time in other places, it's very hard to find a system, as imperfect as it is sometimes, that works as good for as many people. So, look, there's a reason, for better or for worse, while there's still millions of people lining up to try to get here, and for whatever you might feel about that, and I'm an immigrant myself, so I understand what that is, that is, people across the world still vote with their feet. America is still this sort of shining, shining thing on the hill. I think it's I think it's important for us to live up to that. As much as we all know American history, it's so funny that the ideals on which it was founded were even greater than the people that found it. You know what I mean? In some ways, right? And also the actions, in the interim, right? So I still think that
We're still moving toward a more perfect union.
100%, and still really moving towards the ideals in which it was founded. So I think that's what's so hopeful about it, is that we're not there yet. That there's so much more improvement that we can do to live up to who everyone else thinks we are, and to what was written. So I just, I think that's exciting. See, again, part of it is my own upbringing. Again, moving around in Queens and trying to to improve our lives with our families, or what I do, professionally, which is step into were considered not great companies and seeing who we do better. I have a certain optimism with with disorganization, with imperfection. So I think that when I see something that's not perfect, it's good. It makes me feel happy that this can be improved upon. Whereas some people, I think it's just it's probably a personality flaw. I think there are people like, oh, I like things that are perfect. Well, what's the fun in that? I think the fun is getting involved in something that's not as perfect and making it more so.
Improvement.
Yeah, and so all of America is that. I mean, it's a call out to all of us to participate in America to make it the America that you want it to be.
What would you say to America's youth about the opportunities in business or the opportunities overall to create wealth?
Sure. So what I would say is, I know that I have a hopeful message for America, that I think things are better, and they generally are, and they will get better. There is one element that I think it's important to discuss, which is the fact that the current, if you think about the generations, the boomers, the X, the Y, and the Z, each generation, I think, does feel like there's a little less opportunity before it. And I think that some of that is just because America had such advantages to the rest of the world, even as recently as 50, 60 years ago, which it just doesn't have as much anymore, because maybe because the rest of the world has caught up. And so I think that the younger generations are going to feel less opportunity. They're going to feel that less opportunity, and we need to work to make sure that that they have as much opportunity as we can give them, especially if you think about it. If you take a quick step back, America has achieved so much in it, and you really, if you think about it, our meanest citizens today live better than the kings did, 150 years ago. So it's like, and so it is just harder to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. So if they feel like, wow, in my parents' generation, they did this much more than where they started, but in ours, even though we're starting here, we're only going to get this much more. It feels like you're taking a step back, and I think we need to work hard to make sure that that the younger generations feel included in the prosperity.
Right. Well, it seems to me that there's a connection, Soo Kim, from what you just said, to the importance of pre-K through 12, making sure kids get the right opportunities educationally.
Absolutely. Look, education is, but it's interesting you say that. I actually am a believer that education isn't, one size fits all. I think that, I'm not an educational expert, but I just think that educational opportunities should meet students where they are. Not everybody needs to get a four-year liberal arts college degree. I just think that that's sort of a weird, sort of obsession, a monomania in our society. I think that we need to value vocational skills. We need to value lots of other different tracks, which I think it's easier to get to if we start earlier, and again, meet people's interests and their proclivities sooner. So I think that's right. I think education is the key, but I think it's education writ large, broadly, yes. Not just arithmetic and writing, but really where do we bring people so that ultimately everybody wants to be productive members of society.
Soo Kim, thank you so much.
Dr. Chavis, the honor is mine. Thank you again.